the question of methods and the question of theory, though, I think also gets to or takes us further into the territory that both of you have talked about, which I think is the role of the public intellectual or the researcher as someone who is trying to get people to see the broader picture. And in this respect, I think in America today, you know, in a public health realm where the idea of social determinants of health and the impact of social structure on the level of distribution of health, the way that social exposures and social position wear people out sooner or later over the life course, all these things are very well established in our field. We understand them, but even among, I mean, let alone the public, even among our colleagues, you know, it can often be difficult to get people to move away from the dopamine. You know, you sort of feel like sort of step away from the bench, sir. You know, look out the window, please, and see, you know, how the biomedical phenomenon you are investigating is actually situated within this broader social perspective. So I at least have come to feel that it must become, you know, a standard part of everything I do to contextualize. To, you know, you're a big fan of causal models, I know, Jeff, and have written some good things in our great chapter in our book, methods book about causal modeling. But to get people to step back and say, whatever I am studying, and even though I'm quite interested in the particular, you know, say, deterrent effect of a penalty, I am looking at that in terms of, in the context of a society in which $5 ain't the same for every person, you know, that might be exposed to that fine. And that for some people, $5 could actually be a pretty unhealthy and powerful factor in, you know, whether they pay their rent next week or whether they can feed their kids. So I talk a lot about equity and point a lot to the effects of social and, you know, especially wealth and income inequality. I know that you've been recently writing a bit about racial inequity and the effects of the potentially differential benefits and costs of law being spread by race. Maybe you could, I wonder if you guys could say a little bit about how you think about our role in raising questions of disparities and equities and how that fits into the research you choose to do and the way you choose to do it.
Who do you want to go first?
Jeff, why don't you go ahead, because I know you have this piece you've just...
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've written previously about this issue of racial inequities in the application of mental health law in particular. And so reason I've been trying to sort of translate some of that thinking and perspective to the problem of, you know, firearm restrictions. We have to kind of separate out the consideration of differences and disparities and discrimination from the immediate context where people make decisions that are discriminatory and the upstream institutionalized ways in which these disparities are baked into our system way upstairs. So you could have a decision maker, you know, who like deciding whether somebody should be on outpatient commitment or not, who could be completely colorblind, and you're still going to end up with what, you know, in New York, the New York lawyers for the public interest accused this whole policy of being racist because Black people were 7 times more likely to get on mandated outpatient commitment than white people were. But if you then go upstream and you say, well, let's look at who's actually diagnosed with serious mental illnesses and substance abuse disorders. Let's look at who's in the public behavioral health system for reasons of financing. Let's look at who gets involuntarily committed to the hospital. Let's look at who gets incarcerated, because that's another way people qualify for this. And our analysis sort of, we took that apart. We just deconstructed it, and we looked at racial disparities using different denominators, right? The denominator of the whole population, down to the denominator of people who are actually sort of eligible in the public system for this intervention. The disparity goes way down once you get to this very highly sorted population. Then the question you also have to ask is, when you using the IOM framework, you don't have just a difference, but you have a disparity because there are differences in need, or however you define it. Is the intervention that is being delivered disproportionately to, say, young Black men, is that beneficial or is it harmful, right? So like to go to the firearms law example, in California, for example, and many other states, if you are involved with the juvenile justice system, you are prohibited from purchasing or possessing a firearm until you're 30 years old. You have to have this period through your whole adult, first decade of your adult life, crime-free, and then you can, even though your juvenile record might have been expunged. Well, from a public health point of view, we might think that makes sense because this is a high-risk population. We're going to save people's lives. But maybe if you are looking at it from the perspective of the person who says, well, you're taking my gun away and I need that to be protected, or looking at it from the justice reform perspective that says, well, we want to make sure people aren't, incarcerated, then you think, well, maybe we need to look at it from a different point of view. And then you look at some of these gun laws, for example, the North Carolina pistol permit law, which was passed in 1919, and it gives sheriffs this discretionary criterion to deny a pistol permit to anyone who lacks good moral character. And if you look at what was being written when that law was passed in the height of the Jim Crow era, it looks pretty transparently like it was a way to give sheriffs the discretion to deny a pistol permit to Black people who lacked good moral character. But now do we flash forward and say, well, this is fruit of the poison tree, so let's not have a pistol permit law at all because it originates in this. But many of our institutions today, just about all of them, have this origin story in a period where white supremacy was really underlying everything. So I think what we need to do is, among other things, bring this question of racial equity, racial justice, and front and center, and make it a really important outcome to study in just about every intervention we study, particularly those that have to do with institutions in the criminal justice system, law enforcement, policing, and so on.
Well, Alex, I've had the privilege at my center of working with you and Kelly Comroe and your team in Emory on some studies that were aimed at taking your traditional quasi-experimental approach to the question of whether income support programs of various kinds have positive health effects. So basically asking to me, the basic question of, if you have a lot of income inequality, does giving the poorer people more money reduce some of the negative health effects of that? And I wonder if you could say a little bit about that work as an example of how our public health law research can go right to the heart of social determinants and inequities.
Yes, thanks, Scott. I think I'll get to the specifics of the research in a minute, but this whole area of social determinants of health is so critically important. And it's not only for these fundamental social justice reasons, which Jeff also alluded to, but it's because they affect the whole panoply of health and social problems, right? If we just stop and think about it, the potential here of this, even if we have a specific law or policy and it improves the social determinants of health by some small fraction, say it's 1%. If we multiply that 1% benefit now, not just across the entire population, like we usually are when we're looking at population health, but now multiply it also across the whole long list of health and social problems that are made worse by these inequalities and the poor social conditions and environments in which people live. And fully understanding how best to use law to address these inequalities, of course, we got a long way to go. And we quickly get into these complex systems of reciprocal and reinforcing disadvantage. But we are where we are, and we need to we just need to move forward and work towards improvements. And so I'm part of this great team at Emory University that Scott has been involved with as well, led by Professor Comrell, looking at the effects on child health of family economic security and specifically how they're affected by laws, state level laws on minimum wage and earned income tax credits, because this is what feeds more money to the people that are in the lower rungs economically. And we found significant effects on birth outcomes and infant health, but there's a lot more research needed, and there's a lot of stuff waiting to be done. I mean, this is really an area ripe for a lot more attention by our field, and on the role of various mechanisms in addressing this. So just as one example out of that research, just a small example, we found that the size of the tax credits are monotonically related to the magnitude of the beneficial effect on infant health. In other words, the larger the tax credit, the larger the reduction in low birth weight births, for example. It's logical. But there also appears to be an effect of the initial implementation of a new law on providing for a tax credit that is separate from the size of the credit. So this suggests that there might be some social influence processes associated with the initiation of the credit that operates independent of the amount of the credit. And this has implications for theory as well as future policy developments. So the economists, just to oversimplify, you know, a dollar is a dollar. So they're going to quantify everything in a dollar, and you look at the effects of giving a dollar or giving X number of dollars, and they look at it that way. But this opens up, well, a dollar, as Scott said, a dollar to a poorer person is not the same as a dollar to a richer person. But the first dollar that's associated with some new program that facilitates getting into the workforce and changes the dynamic in a family and the relationships between partners and spouses, who knows what, but it just opens up. There's a whole lot of other social processes that are being influenced by this law, as well as the dollars that go into people's pockets that are also really important. But we also find, the last point, is that African Americans experience the larger absolute benefits, the beneficial health effects of the tax credits. They experience larger benefits, but they experience the same relative health effects of whites. So thus, you know, you just think of it, the differential effects are due to the existing disparities. Black families are at higher baseline levels of risk. But the studies that we've done to date, they're just scratching the surface of all this needed research and policy innovation and advancement of theory to address just this realm of the social determinants of health around family economic security.